poked fun at the previous films for their continuity and story problems? Well, we haven't seen nothing yet. Alright, let's get this crap over with. Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. What happened to the six? I guess the filmmakers said screw with numbering the sequels. Now, before we get into this review, let's get some miscellaneous stuff out of the way. First off, there are two different versions of this film. Yeah, apparently the original cut, which is known as the producer's cut, was so bad they made a new version with alternate scenes. It's the first time I've heard of a producer's cut, but regardless, a new version is known as the theatrical cut. And because these new scenes changed up the plot a bit, I'll be talking about both cuts. Great. Two shitty movies in one review.
Good. Twice the pride, double the fall.
Alright then, let's start with the opening. So, in both versions, we see Jamie Lloyd, now a teenager, and she's been abducted by a mysterious cult, and it's revealed that she is pregnant. In this case, I think the producer's cut does a better bridging of the previous film to this one. If you remember, the last we seen of Jamie Lloyd was at the police station after Michael was set free by the man in black. After that, the movie fades to black. This time, we get a couple flashback scenes that implies that the man in black kidnapped Jamie and has been holding her all this time. Really? Well, what the hell have they been doing with her all these years? She was like 9 years old the last time we saw her, and now she's a teenager. She has a baby too, and what do they plan to do with her and the baby? Well, we'll find out later. For now, one of the women working with the cult helps Jamie and the baby escape. At this point, both versions are the same, with Michael showing up and giving us the first kill of the movie. The look of Michael is pretty good for this film. The mask looks a hell of a lot better than Part 5's mask, which is nice, and this opening still keeps Michael as being scary. As both versions continue, Jamie ends up at a bus station looking for help. She tries to call the police, but there's no one available, so she calls into a radio show pleading for them to help, and she even calls for Dr. Loomis. At this point, we're reintroduced to Tommy Doyle, played by Paul Rudd. Yes, that Paul Rudd. Many people have criticized his acting in this film, saying it's basically a poor performance. Personally, I'm indifferent to his acting here. 6 movies into this franchise, and it's like, yeah, okay, his acting isn't anything to praise, but I just don't care at this point. We also see Loomis get a visit from an old friend, a character that we haven't seen since the first movie, Dr. Wynn. How interesting to see him again of all people. Aside from Dr. Loomis, there's not many characters that I found likable. I had some investment in Tommy, but that's only because I like Paul Rudd, even if his performance is generic and uninspired. Everyone else is bland and forgettable. We have Mr. Strode, who is a complete prick. He smacks his own adult daughter, making her bleed. What an ass! Luckily, he gets a gruesome death, so that's something to look forward to. The deaths in this movie are pretty crazy. In the theatrical cut, Mr. Strode's head explodes. Horror fans always love a good head explosion. Towards the end of the theatrical cut, Michael goes on a murderous rampage. It is nice to see Michael doing what he's doing without too much involvement with the cult. Regardless of all that, Jamie doesn't get any help and she runs out of the station and gets ran off the road by a barn. At this point, she's being stalked by Michael. In the producer's cut, she gets stabbed with a knife, while in the theatrical cut, she's impaled on a piece of farm equipment. And as Michael goes for the baby in the truck Jamie was driving, the baby is gone. Well, for an opening scene, it could be worse, I guess. But funny enough, the worst is yet to come in this movie. Remember in my review of Halloween 3, I said the filmmakers would reuse certain plot points from that film in later sequels? Well, this is where those plot points are used again, but in a different way. I said back then that it was all about Halloween and getting it back to its sacrificial origins. So, the cult in this film is called the Cult of Thorn. Their symbol is the same one we've seen in the previous film on the wrists of Michael and the Man in Black. What's happening here is that there is a druid curse that brings up some nasty crap. Think the 10 plagues of Egypt in the Exodus story, but for druids. In order to avert disaster, the sacrifice of a family is required. So that's why Michael's been out on a hunt for his family this whole time. An interesting idea, but for God's sake, why does it have to be for Michael Myers? When you boil it down, Michael is just a pawn, a tool for the Cult of Thorn to use. And I hate this idea so much. It's so far removed from the simple yet terrifying story that we were given in 1978. So the goal is for Michael to eliminate his entire bloodline, which is Jamie and her baby. But there's more to this, and oh my god, does it get stupid. More on that later. So we get reintroduced to the Strode family, who just so happens to be living in the old Myers house. And as a quick side note, at least it doesn't look like a goddamn medieval castle. Anyways, the Strodes are living here, and we see that they have kids of their own, one of whom is an adult. Their daughter has a son named Danny, and throughout the film, he keeps having visions of the man in black, as well as Michael Myers. He also keeps hearing voices telling him to kill. We can assume that this is what drove Michael to kill Judith in 1963, but this really doesn't go anywhere. Just like with the Jamie Lloyd cliffhanger in Halloween 4, they don't utilize anyone but Michael as the killer. Danny's importance to the story is very limited, so we'll just move on. Something positive I will say is that certain scenes feel like the classic Halloween. We get several music cues of the original Halloween soundtrack, and the scenes of Michael stalking people are decent, though it doesn't make much sense to praise a movie for something that's to be expected, specifically if it's in a pre existing franchise. The thing is that these music cues mainly come up in the producer's cut. Why this didn't carry over to the theatrical cut more, I have no idea. While writing this review, I watched both versions simultaneously, and it's bizarre to see how many changes they made to this one film. One change is that Jamie survives Michael's attack at the beginning of the producer's cut, but eventually gets killed at the hospital. Either way, Michael's target is Jamie's son, who Tommy names Steven. But Michael doesn't stop there. He's also trying to kill the rest of the Strode family. Tommy finds Danny, and they wait at the Myers house where Kara Strode finds them. Tommy tells them that they are in danger and begins to explain the druid symbols and their relation to Michael Myers, further explaining why he kills. He tells Kara that Michael sees anyone who lives at his house as his family, which makes no sense. We also get an explanation for why the movie is called The Curse of Michael Myers, funny enough. It's also interesting to point out that we actually get a little of this mythos in Halloween 2, where Dr. Loomis is at a school and written in blood on the wall is Sam Hain, which isn't actually pronounced that way, but who cares? While it is nice to have a callback to Halloween 2, this is something that really annoys me. This film is simultaneously ruining the Michael Myers mythos by explaining everything. I think Cinemaster put it best when he said this.
But overall, the idea of Michael Myers being reduced from a mysterious killer that acts on his own will to being a pawn of a cult is a terrible idea. He was more frightening when he was his own entity killing people for no explained reason. In the first movie, when Dr. Loomis explains that he's pure evil and has the devil's eyes, that's all you ever needed to know. Giving him all this backstory and making someone else in control of him flat out ruined the whole thing.
And don't get me wrong, I actually like the cult aspect of this movie. It's a nice callback to Halloween 3. The problem is that they are tying this in with Michael and why he kills, instead of them being completely separate entities. The producer's cut has more of the cult aspects prevalent, whereas the theatrical stays a little closer to how Michael is supposed to be. Okay, let's talk about some stupid crap. Throughout the film, the focus has been on keeping Jamie's son alive. Because he's Michael's next of kin after Jamie, it makes sense as to why Michael wants him dead. But the producer's cut takes this point a step further, or I should say several creepy and disturbing steps further. So it turns out that the father of Jamie's son, Stephen, is Michael Myers.
That is disgusting, awkward, tone deaf, shameful, wrong, juvenile, dirty, creepy, insulting, and it's just plain fucking stupid!
This is supposed to be Halloween, by the way. You know, that franchise about a mass killer that murders people. And putting aside the complete stupidity of the uncle dad thing, how exactly was this a good idea to impregnate your own niece and kill your baby? It's explained that the Curse of Thorn requires a sacrifice of an entire family in order to avert famine and disaster. Michael is afflicted with the Curse of Thorn and will only be set free once the last of his bloodline is eliminated. Okay, so if Jamie is the last of his bloodline, why would they need another of Michael's bloodline? Why didn't the cult just have Michael kill her right there? It was the prime opportunity. She couldn't get away, and no one would save her. By getting her pregnant and allowing her to give birth, you've just opened the door for a possible escape, and by extension, delaying your plans even further.
Not a great plan.
The theatrical cut isn't any better, nor does it solve the problem of having two living relatives of Michael Myers. Whether or not Myers is the dad, the cult could have just eliminated Jamie and her baby right there. Hell, this movie shows us that the cult kidnapped Jamie at the end of Halloween 5, so why didn't they have Michael kill her then? When we last see Jamie, she's a kid, but now in this film she's a teenager. Why haven't they offed her yet? What use was there in creating another blood relative to Michael Myers? It also turns out that the man in black was Dr. Wynn this whole time, and he also happens to be the leader of the cult. Here's yet another attempt to call back to the first film. I guess we can assume that Dr. Wynn was the one giving Michael driving lessons this whole time.
Sam Haddonfield is 150 miles away from here. Now, for God's sakes, he can't drive a car. He was doing very well last night. Maybe someone around here gave him lessons.
Alright, let's talk about the ending. First off, both endings take place at Smith's Grove. And depending on your investment in following Michael Myers so far, you have two choices on which ending you think is better and what the endings mean. Based on what I picked up on, both endings have Michael surviving. The theatrical cut has Tommy supposedly beating Michael to death, but at the end we see Michael's mask lying on the ground where he was earlier. Then we hear Loomis screaming bloody murder. I'm guessing Michael caught up to him because he was dumb enough to stay at Smith's Grove by himself instead of going with Tommy and Kara. Now, this scream was taken from the producer's cut, and the clip of Loomis staying behind was also taken from the producer's cut. Speaking of which, this cut heavily reduces Michael as we know him. While in the theatrical cut, Michael is shown killing many people at the end, like he always does. The producer's cut has him standing around for the most part. Tommy comes up with this plan to use these druid rune stones to cancel out Michael's thorn energy or something. It works funny enough, and Tommy, with Kara, Danny, and the baby, are able to escape. This is where Loomis stays behind, just like in the theatrical cut. So Loomis goes back to where Michael was standing and notices that he is now laying on the ground. He unmasks Michael, and it's Dr. Wynn. He tells Loomis that Michael is gone, and now it's his turn to watch over Michael. We see Michael is now dressed up as Dr. Wynn, and he walks off. Loomis looks at his own wrist and sees a symbol of thorn on it. And here comes the scream. And that's how the movie ends, with that damn scream in both versions. Sadly, this scream would be the last thing that Donald Pleasance would ever do on film, as he passed away shortly after this movie was completed. It really is heartbreaking to see a legendary actor go. It's a path that we will all walk down eventually. And it sucks that this was his last outing in such a shit film. With that said, we can at least appreciate what he did for the Halloween series. I think it's safe to say that Donald Pleasance carried this franchise on his back up to this point. And despite all the stupidity in it, I think he's earned his rest. Thank you so much, Donald Pleasance, for your amazing work. Your legacy lives on. Jesus Christ. Well, that's Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. And that's also the end of the Thorn Trilogy, and the last we see of Dr. Loomis, played by Donald Pleasance. Was it all worth it? Yes and no. From one point of view, seeing Donald Pleasance is really the only reason to sit through these films. They're not very good, especially when compared to the first film. With that said, Donald Pleasance makes it worth watching at least once. We owe him that. Everything else? No. I can do without the cheap masks, the explanation of why Michael kills, and the whole Uncle Dad BS. Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers is just a generic horror movie with more focus on a cult and their evil practices rather than the terrifying and immortal killer Michael Myers. Which, by the way, we never get an explanation as to why Michael is immortal, but who cares? I said in the last video that I would give my own idea for how to utilize Michael Myers and include the Cult of Thorn in this series. So, here we go. You start out with the first Halloween and keep the original ending intact. From there, you turn Halloween 3 Season of the Witch into Halloween 2 Season of the Witch, and have the story take place in the Michael Myers universe. The story would take place a few years later. During Season of the Witch, show something like a memorial of the Haddonfield Massacre that took place years ago. Have Silver Shamrock connected to the Cult of Thorn, and have Connell Cochran as a member. You can even show him with the Cult of Thorn symbol on his wrist. After Season of the Witch, make Halloween 3 and 4 and have it feature the return of Dr. Dan Chalice. A fun idea could be to have Dr. Chalice and Dr. Loomis team up. They could be on a quest to hunt down the Cult of Thorn. who could face some creepy supernatural threats, and at the end of Halloween 4, have it revealed that the Cult of Thorn has been looking for Michael Myers all these years. The reason is they believe that Michael is a supernatural entity. From here, you give the audience a teaser that calls back to Michael being on the loose again at the end of the original Halloween. And now he's coming back. Then boom, Halloween 5, the return of Michael Myers. The story could be a mix of Halloween 2018 and the original Halloween 4. Laurie has a family now, she has a husband, and her daughter could be Jamie Lloyd. Laurie is basically how she is in the 2018 film, with all the traps and such. And this time it would make sense because, unlike in 2018, where Michael was caught in 1978, this time Michael was never caught. He's still out there, somewhere. And Laurie has prepped herself and her family to be ready should Michael come back to Haddonfield. Then have an epic trio of Dr. Dan Chalice, Dr. Samuel Loomis, and Laurie Strode fighting against Michael in the Cult of Thorn. You could utilize aspects of Season of the Witch and bring in John Carpenter to direct. God damn it, there was so much potential with this franchise. And I know I just threw a boatload of fanfiction your way, guys. With that said, I hope you can see from my perspective how Halloween could have been so much better. Instead of getting the same old shit, we could have had a popular franchise that made the horror slasher genre even better than it was. Let Friday the 13th be known for being the cheesy horror franchise with terrible characters and modern exploitation. Meanwhile, Halloween would be going to the next level with new stories that are connected to an overall narrative. Basically, have it like how the MCU built up their universe. You can see that there were aspects of the Thorn Trilogy that I liked. Not all of it was bad, it was just heavily misused. I know many people today are tired of the whole shared universe aspect for movies these days, but imagine if they utilized even a little of my suggestions for the Halloween franchise back then. Boy, would it have been awesome. Well, thank you all for tuning into the HalloScream review series once again. This is a special occasion as we have concluded the Thorn Trilogy, and we are now stepping into the first reboot of the Halloween franchise. Stay tuned next week for Halloween H2O, aka Halloween 20 years later. A special thanks goes out to Mother Molder and Kyle Curtis Flett, part of the Dark Aether Files Patreon. If you want to support us further and get access to exclusive content, the link is in the description below. So, with that all being said, thank you all very much for watching, listening, and supporting. And as always, my fellow investigators, remember, the entertainment is out there.
Come with us.
No, I have a little business to attend to here.